Great. So we're all set to get started here. Thanks for joining on the call. Like I said before, there's too many people on the call to actually go through individual introductions, but I think we have a real powerhouse of people, and I think there's a lot of value in each one of you connecting with one another. So what I'm going to do after the call is share a little email with everyone's LinkedIn profiles and introductions, so you guys can feel free to connect with one another. I think there's a lot that can come out of that. So we'll jump straight into the call because the focus of today's conversation is the Economic Space Agency. 4 words: economic space, the Economic Space Agency. 3 words were just really exciting the first time I came across them. Incidentally, we ended up spending, the Sacred Capital team ended up spending an evening with them at their Oakland space, where a whole bunch of them live out of one home and ideate, create, and design together. And it's a fantastic coincidence that they're in Mumbai at the same dates as I was, and so I thought it'd be great to put together this conversation and for them to share a little bit about what's going on. So I've already briefed them about the kind of people on this call. For the others here, we've got the whole spectrum. We've got a bunch of people who are deep sustainability thinkers. So either heads of large organizations and leading the sustainability practices, or people who've been thinking about social impact, people who've been thinking about the social fabric of communities around the world. There's people who are design thinkers. There's a few who are running venture capital funds. There's a few investors, angels, advisors to Sacred Capital as well. We've got it all. So one of the challenges I put forth to the team here was this is a really diverse audience, and there's kind of going to be a tension in terms of how you address them. So you can't go too social and design thinking. You can't be too capitalist. But I think that's the challenge that the 21st century poses to us, because we're trying to harmonize all of these segments of society. And so I think this call represents exactly that. So I'm going to get straight to it and introduce Sky. Sky, can you wave to? I don't think you're on. Oh, you're not on the. How do we get you? Are you guys not on the call?
I don't know.
Oh. Oh. Sorry about that, guys. Do you have the calendar invite? Or this is... Akshay, can you just go... Whose laptop is that? Yeah, so just open the calendar invite and send them and click the link. Yeah, Akshay. Just open the calendar.
Yeah, I'm trying to open the calendar.
Cool. And the laptop there, maybe we can just have it centered on all the others, because there's a bunch of things like the water bottle and glasses that are getting prime importance on this call when maybe they shouldn't be. So I'll introduce the ECSA team member that is on the screen. Eric? No, how am I saying it?
Yes.
Eric, is that right? Eric is based in Montreal, and along with Laura and Sky, who are based out of Oakland, they've been on tour for almost a month.
Yeah.
And are really looking forward to the trip back to Oakland. So for those on the West Coast who've joined into the call, I'm sure you guys can look forward to connecting with them once they're back there. The Economic Space Agency, if I was to introduce them in one sentence, I actually asked them, just before this call, like how I should be introducing them. And I think it's one of the toughest things I've ever done. The Economic Space Agency is creating an economic computational fabric for the world, if I was to put it across in just a few words. And that is kind of cool, and through this call we'll break down what exactly that means. And effectively what we're saying is, while platforms like Ethereum and some of the other blockchain platforms like EOS, etc., that are in existence today can be extremely rigid and have certain limitations. But what ECSA effectively says is we don't even need to define ourselves as a platform. We actually call ourselves a fabric. And this fabric would effectively be creating rules by which economic capital could flow into entities across the world. And these entities need not even be organizations, they can also be people. And that sounds extremely interesting. And so we'll have them break down a little bit in terms of what that means. So to start off, I'll get Eric, Sky, and Laura to kind of explain, one of them to just explain what ECSA, the Economic Space Agency, aspires to do in the very long term. And so in their language, we'll kind of break it down. I have mentioned to some of you over email that the conversation and the language on this call can get extremely complex at times, but my role here is to break it down for you and simplify it to a certain extent. So if you guys at any point of time feel like there's some more clarification you need, feel free to drop a question on the chat. I'll pick it up and that'll guide the discussion. So to give this flow, for the first half an hour, I'll ask them a bunch of questions, and then we can open it up to people on the call. If you'd like to ask your question in person, so just wave your hand and I will go to you guys and you can unmute yourselves and ask your question. If not, you can leave a question on the chat window and I'll pick it up from there. So to get things going, first up, Sky, Laura, Eric, maybe one of you can explain what exactly the Economic Space Agency aspires to do. And Eric, since you're the only one among the team with the camera on you, maybe you can start.
Thank you.
Sky is probably the best to do this. Do we have Sky on camera?
Not yet. You
why
want to switch?
Yeah. Yeah, please do that. Thank you.
Okay.
Should we unmute the speaker?
No, that's fine. If at any point you guys think the audio isn't clear enough, please let us know. Great. Sky, on you. The camera's on.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Siddhartha. Thank you for everyone joining us in the various time zones around the world. Really a pleasure to be speaking to such a diverse group of thinkers. It really is a testament to the work we also are doing of bringing together a lot of collective intelligences across an interdisciplinary range to be able to really think what the new economy might look like. And as Siddhartha also has a difficult time encapsulating what the Economic Space Agency is trying to do in only a pithy statement, we equally struggle with that. We have various versions. We think of ourselves as creating the operating system for the crypto economy, also the cyber-social infrastructure of the future.
No, continue. Yeah.
Basically, we are trying to take a full stack approach to approaching the potentials of cryptographic technology. And what that looks like is creating Gravity, which is a world computing fabric that provides a much more flexible smart contract infrastructure than what's currently available through the Bitcoin blockchain or Ethereum blockchain and other offerings. But we don't think that's enough. Unlike others in Silicon Valley, we aren't only technological experts or technological fetishists, but we believe that, again, a collective intelligence needs to be brought to bear to think through these problems. And so that's why we also are building the space platform that will make this very powerful, supple, distributed computing fabric of Gravity easily usable to the end user so that we can hopefully see the widespread adoption of cryptographic technology that so far has been inhibited by some of the scalability and other limitations of the existing offerings. And so we bring together on our team about 25 people distributed throughout the world, and certainly have the technological chops of people who have decades of experience working in both cryptographic technologies, designing distributed systems, as well as one of the founders of the computing paradigm in which we operate, which is one of our key innovations, and that is object capabilities computing that harks back to the late 70s, early 80s with Project Xanadu, for those of you who are familiar with that lineage. And in addition to those technologists, we also bring together artists, social theorists, radical financiers, game designers, lawyers, activists, really kind of a consortium of people that we think are necessary to rethink the economy as we know it. And that's really the ambition, or the scale at which we're confronting this kind of historical conjuncture with the opening up of these smart contracts technologies that really remain in their infancy, but we think that they'll be reaching their full potential through unlocking some more of the flexibility and plasticity that so far isn't yet available.
Got it. I'd like you to break that down further. You mentioned that the flexibility and plasticity that is required for the flow of economic capital isn't really, available right now. So for most people who are in this room and who've joined the call from all over, most of them are familiar with Ethereum. Most of them have been following the developments in the new economy over the last few months. And so it's almost like a bunch of us have just kind of wrapped our heads around Ethereum. And here you are saying, we're taking this to another level. And so our first question is why? And the next question is, without any tech speak or geek speak, can you tell us what that would mean for us? If one of you can kind of explain that in English, that would be good.
So maybe I can try.
Yeah. So
give it a go.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah.
So basically, you may be familiar with Bitcoin, which basically can be thought of as a global network ledger, right? Yeah. Like a big public blockchain that enables the verification of the transmission of disintermediated flows of value, basically from one party to the other. So Ethereum represents the next logical step after Bitcoin, and Ethereum can basically be thought of as a big mainframe computer, analogous to the big IBM mainframe of the 50s, essentially. And again, it is like a big public blockchain, which means that all the nodes that participate to running the network have to replicate the same information again to all the nodes for the particular transaction to be able to be inscribed on the Ethereum blockchain. So if Ethereum is like a big word computer or a big mainframe computer, what we are building with Gravity can be thought of as the PC network revolution of the 90s, essentially. So what Gravity enables is the possibility to host both private and public contracts within the same network, which is something that Ethereum at the moment is not able to do, because again, it is a big, heavy, monolithic blockchain, essentially. So already projects in the cryptocurrency ecosystem have been running against the limitation of Ethereum. If you're familiar with the ICOs, the initial coin offerings, there have been cases, for instance, the Status ICO, the Bancor ICO, that raised an incredible amount of money in a span of few minutes, but the downside of that has been clogging the Ethereum network for hours, and so making it really unusable. And so our analysis is that in order to make the potential of token-based technologies available to the majority of people, not only we need an end user layer, which is what we're building with Space, but we also need an infrastructure that is scalable, that is interoperable, and that solves the limitation of Ethereum. Just to give an idea, Ethereum at the moment is able to process something like 15 transactions per second. So not a lot at all. Bitcoin is even 7. With Gravity, we are talking about the order of thousands of committed transactions per second. So that already gives an idea of the much more flexible, fast, scalable kind of infrastructure and kind of applications that we can build on top of it.
So to sort of frame it the way as I understand it, you're saying, you know, everyone here kind of understands the importance of the new economy and how Ethereum has enabled that over the last year or so. But Ethereum is still a big, chunky mainframe, kind of like an 80s computer, which occupied the size of a room, and we still had to go to this giant computer to enable a transaction. And what you're saying is you want to decentralize that down to each person with a smartphone. Is that a good analogy to make? Like and so from as in, you know, person with a background in economics, I would say the power of that is any kind of economic transaction today, we still need to go to Ethereum's centralized computing network. But in your case, you're trying to decentralize that down to each individual and each entity. Can one of you share what a world like that might look like? What that would mean? So at the end of the day, like Ethereum has unleashed a new kind of organization, which is completely decentralized and taken away, you know, effectively allowed them to access public capital. So where are you taking this, or what do you see the world effectively looking like? Yeah.
Explain with use cases.
Yeah.
For people who are not living that world.
Yeah. So we just had a question from the room. Ashish suggested that we use real live use cases. Maybe you can use a couple and just say, this is what is possible with your new fabric, with Gravity, for example. And so open to you guys.
Maybe one way to answer the question would be to say that with the kind of technology that we're developing, one of the goals, and it can be many, many other applications, is to open source finance. So to create new modes of organizations that will allow people to tap in their own network value production. So basically, as you know very well, the new layer of value production nowadays is mostly going through our presence online. So we work within the paradigm of the attention economy. So basically what is being sold nowadays is our attention. And right now, like in the 60s, we were moving in a world where the attention was basically captured by the cathodic screens, that is the TVs. Then later on, the first layer of internet as we know it has been kind of captured by a few big monopolies. So Google, Amazon, Facebook, who are making an amazing amount of money out of the data, the mega data, the big data that we're just issuing freely as we're roaming online. So one of the key advantage of like the blockchain turn in general, but more precisely the type of tools that we're developing, is that you will be able to capture your own value production, both in terms of the type of organizations that you're part of, like the type of networks that you're part of, but also in terms of the data that you're issuing while being on. So these are two very important elements of the type of value creation and the value proposition of Gravity and Space. So basically, you can imagine someone from the future coming to you and say, like, how could you like possibly be part of a network and have no stake in that network? You know, like how could you possibly be exchanging everything that's most precious to you and not having a stake in the value that's being produced?
Can you give an example of that? Like maybe with Facebook?
Well, we can imagine in a couple of years that the social medias as we know them will be broken down and will be reconfigured, will be fragmented and reconfigured based on the blockchain technology, so that everyone that has value to share can have a stake in that sharing.
So if I
go ahead.
I could just take one of the use cases that you said. There are monolithic organizations like Google to whom we're giving data absolutely free, by doing searches, and we should give our data. Are you saying that with gravity and other enabling technologies, I can effectively have a choice where I say, this data I am giving, but there is a commercial value attached to that?
It's already starting.
I'll just say that question out loud for the room. Ashish in the room drew a use case and said, effectively, we are handing over our data to Google, which gets monetized, and we're effectively handing it over for free. So is Gravity or the Economic Space Agency, proposing a system whereby I can actually have some kind of reward system for the data or information that I'm offering? That's the question.
So that is already kind of happening. That is, you have a browser like Brave, for example. I don't know if you're familiar with it. That goes really fast because it doesn't allow for advertisement to enter the browser, but then offers you to be paid if you allow for some advertisement to happen on your browser, then you get paid for that. So that's just an example that already exists, but we envisage a future in which that kind of dispositive are more and more generalized.
And maybe if I can jump in more specifically related to Gravity and how it creates this sort of inversion of our relationship with the internet, and not to get too technical, but leveraging this different computational paradigm of capabilities. One really crucial principle of that is called the principle of least authority. So what it means is that you enter the distributed network as an agent that has kind of full capacities, as like a monad, Leibniz sense, as a self-constituted agent. And then one autonomously and in a very fine-grained manner grants capabilities to other virtual machines to accomplish particular purposes. So whether that's accessing some kind of data because you're doing something around healthcare, or you're making a transaction for a latte, whatever it might be. And so it creates this inversion where instead of freely giving away data or not having any control or ownership over it, it starts from a presupposition of complete data sovereignty. And that allows for a whole range of applications of being able to finely modulate or dispense with one's data in ways that are advantageous to oneself. So we really think a lot in terms of right now we having capturing of our data or of our value by so many different ways. And what we're trying to design is a mode of empowering people to self-capture their own value that they create through socially networked value production. And part of one more piece that then enters in relation to Ethereum or the existing public blockchains is because Gravity allows for this organizational and scalable fluidity, because everything doesn't need to be a public contract, that everyone and every node in the network around the world needs to be verifying the state that that's happening. That if I do a local transaction with just us in this room, of course we don't need thousands of nodes around the globe to be looking at what we're doing here. It's much more interesting for us to be able to design our consensus mechanisms, design the kinds of interactions that are appropriate for the objectives we're trying to carry out, that only implicates or only include the people in the room right here for the purposes that we want. And that's kind of the paradigm shift that we're offering, both allowing that initial presupposition of data sovereignty, but then very plastic, flexible, kind of modulatable relations that can be 100 million people if it needs to be a global currency-like application, or it can be the 30 people here on this call and in this room working together to kind of capture and circulate the value we're producing.
Great.
And if I can just jump in as well, one concrete case we're working in precisely within this field, as you were saying, is I don't know if you've heard of the Buy Twitter campaign. It's a campaign that started on Twitter about last year. And so basically aiming to buy essentially or buy Twitter from the current owners, because Twitter is the only platform that essentially cannot make money through advertising for some reason. And so essentially there has this movement started on Twitter to take over the ownership of the platform and reorganize it in a cooperative way. And so this is something that, for instance, Gravity and the type of smart contracts that we are creating in space is going to make possible. And so this is one example of a very concrete case that we've been working on.
So you had a bunch of questions coming in. I'm gonna, streamline them so we have the flow of the conversation going. But before we head into the questions, just a very simple observation that I'm making. Are you suggesting that we'll have a world where capital can flow easily down to an entity as small as a person? So maybe I'm a home chef in Manila, and right now for me to monetize what I'm doing via Instagram or Facebook or just through my orders is kind of messy and tricky. But you're saying you would provide a fabric where capital could flow as fluidly as that. Is that what we're really looking at here? Like, is that just a suggestion? Just a
different way of thinking of it. Like one of the ways that we like to think of it is that we want to open source finance.
Yeah.
So that is, in that case, both making it easier for anyone who has a project to issue tokens, so to finance its own enterprise. But at the same time, when we talk about finance as an expressive medium, there's also a social layer to it.
Mm-hmm.
That is, the tools for financing production have been mostly concentrated in a few people's hand right now, and it's working within a certain paradigm that we like to call mono-economy. So through the capacity of issuing your own tokens, what it allows you to do is both to more easily make the capital flow into your venture, but it's also allowing you to inscribe qualities into that circulation of the capital. And I think that's something that's quite important for the people that you've gathered here today.
Got it.
The qualitative dimension of the flow of capital means that you can inscribe conditions to its flow. So that it's both a way for capital to form communities around a certain project and then to discriminate according to your own values what kind of coming together of forces, capital and people are being shaped by this possibility of self-issuance.
Got it.
And just quickly, in order to do that self-issuance, one doesn't need to be technologically savvy or a smart contract developer, which is currently the case. In our analysis, that's part of what is holding back kind of the unleashing of the potential of these blockchain technology. And so what we're envisaging with the space platform as a user-centered interface is to basically create a community curated and maintained repository of smart contract templates, so that if you see a model that you like, kind of like boilerplate language in legal contracts, you're able to take this template that allows for a self-issuance or that allows for a cooperative acquisition of a platform like Twitter or something like that, and take it and easily tweak a few of the parameters so that it suits your objectives, and then redeploy it into the world so that it really does allow for this capillary flow of capital or value to the individual level.
Got it. We have a bunch of questions coming in. I'm going to go with the first one. And it's from Abhishek. He says, when we see new innovations like these coming through, there's always this promise of free world and capital flowing freely. And we saw that with the internet in the late 90s. I'm paraphrasing here, so Abhishek, let me know if I don't capture a question well enough. But when this hits reality, we invariably find empires of sorts forming. And so do you see that happening here? Do you see what do the empires of the new economy kind of look like? Or do you genuinely see we could be heading towards a more collaborative, distributed economy? That's the question.
I had the same question. If I can just add a little bit to that. There have been very few successful, sort of, if I can call it not-for-profit, open source experiments. Linux probably is one, and Wikipedia is another. Wikipedia not. I'm sorry.
Red Hat.
Yeah, you can add probably, but still very few. when we hear about things that are happening in the blockchain world, you're hearing about crazy amounts of capital being raised by people who have just ideas and concepts, $180 million,
Yeah.
and people are just waiting for the next sort of big capital raise to happen, which happens. So that sort of feeds into that same question. Are we talking about people, is it a race to create the next Google and the next Amazon and the next Facebook? Because you have access to so much capital that you can control the direction in which this technology goes. And also, if you look at something like Wikipedia, while it is not, it's not for profit, there is a certain degree of control that is established within the system. And it's whoever is controlling that is obviously benevolent and word, but that control is still there, which if the intent changes, can translate into an autocratic institution, whether not for profit. So, I mean, what will stop the same thing happening with the blockchain?
Yeah, if I can jump in on that, there's a couple of ways to address that question. One is the difference between Internet 3.0, the Internet of Value, versus the first wave of the Internet. And there's a really interesting piece by Fred Wilson from Union Square Ventures talking about fat protocols, and that we're entering an age of fat protocols, whereas the initial HTTP and TCP/IP layers of the Internet had a thin value layer at the protocol layer, and then a fat application layer where the value was harvested. And that was basically because it allows only for the state of the system to be kept by individual monopolistic entities, so that there's centralized data control by Facebook, Google, and Amazon in ways that inhibit or create huge barriers of entry for a new search engine, for instance, because Google has such a head start with its network effects by having all of the data that it's been generating. But what happens in this new blockchain paradigm is a capacity to replicate and store a shared data layer in an open and decentralized way, so that there isn't the siloing of all of this data. It's openly available for people and for different applications. And so it means that the protocol layer becomes the fat value layer, because data can't be monopolized or controlled in a proprietary fashion. And so it unlocks the open source potential of these kinds of technologies to precisely avoid the centralization of power or empire formation. And that then the key other piece of that is that we need an economic engine to power that open source development. So this is where, again, there's a leap forward from the Wikipedias and so forth. And to Ethereum's credit, it's a really elegant mechanism that they've created this protocol token that gives one access to stakeholding in the value produced in Ethereum, but also it has a use value of being gas that's used to power the smart contracts that are run on the system. And so that's a similar approach to what Gravity is using for its Gravity token. And so what that allows is a virtuous circle to be formed at the protocol layer, because as the token is introduced and raises its initial capital through the ICO bonanza, as you rightly point out, it then allows for everyone who are stakeholders in that protocol, the venture capitalists or the entrepreneurs, to be invested in the financial success of the protocol, which then incentivizes their participation in developing interesting applications and ways to create value on that protocol, which then appreciates the value of the protocol, which attracts more interest for more applications, but everyone is sharing in the upside of that in a way that is kind of obviously and pronouncedly not possible given the current internet protocol. So that's really where the switch comes. And to go back to the beginning of your question is why we really want to program in relations to the tokens and the smart contracts in a way that precisely guards against the agglomeration of power or centralization in particular places. And for the first time, that becomes possible with the granularity and suppleness of the smart contracts infrastructure with Gravity.
Great. Thank you. I hope that answered your question, Abhishek. We are open for more questions. We had one coming in from Melbourne. Rahul had a question. He says he read in your white paper that you allow organizations to work across platforms or businesses to talk across platforms. But doesn't Ethereum already allow that? That's what Rahul's question is. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that. And so maybe you could also share what it means to be an organization that lists on ECSA and how would that be different from an organization that lists on Ethereum.
So
just before we start, some of the others on the call, I'd love to, if there's any questions that you have, feel free to drop it on the chat window and I'll pick it up from there.
So I can try and answer to this question. At the moment, Ethereum cannot provide on-chain transactions. And so this essentially opens up the possibility, opens up the network of those particular transactions to hacks, to essentially to security breaches. So, and this is again because Ethereum is essentially a public blockchain. And so it means that for private organizations to interact with Ethereum, they need to have their transactions off-chain and then register the hash or the trace of the transaction, the proof of the transaction on the blockchain itself. And so, again, this opens up the network, the entire network, to security breaches that we think, given the importance of the kind of transactions that are effectuated on the Ethereum blockchain, should not happen. And so, because Gravity, with its fabric, computational fabric architecture, is able to host both private and public public forms of organization, essentially, it can really create or give support, give technical support to a much more fluid kind of relation. So not only private and public organizations, but all kind of hybrid approaches to that. And all this happens in an on-chain kind of fashion that is within the network itself. So yeah, I hope this answers the question. If there's any further details,
Rahul seems to be nodding, so I guess that answers this question.
I mean, if the premise really is data sovereignty, I mean, if that's the premise, and obviously that you're being more flexible, what Ethereum couldn't, what stops them? And of course, the stats on 15 transactions per second. I mean, what stops them from doing, like saying that, okay, we went wrong in a couple of spaces, but they've obviously got the following, they've obviously got people already on it. What stops them from doing what we're doing?
I mean, Ethereum itself is a wonderful, elegant solution to the storing of public records, because it is big public blockchain. The thing is that the moment it's being used for all sorts of purposes that do not necessarily conform to the original purpose of the Ethereum blockchain itself. So for this reason, the blockchain is starting to clog, to get a heavy, slow. And so what is stopping them, I think, is precisely the logical centralization of their own data structure of the blockchain itself. They're trying to solve the problem of sharding with the Casper, the new proof of stake programming language, and all these are obviously solutions that are still in phase of development and implementation, and will take time to test. And so, because Ethereum is based on a proof of work, for instance, a kind of consensus mechanism, it means that they have some kind of dependencies that, for instance, we don't have to deal with. We don't. Gravity is not proof of work. Gravity will come with a proof of stake consensus model already built for the public network, and another proof of authority consensus mechanism for the private network. But again, within Gravity, the consensus model itself is designable for the kind of organization we want to create. For instance, if a proof of work kind of model is desirable for a particular organization, that will be possible to be implemented on Gravity, but it's not a priori condition that in a way also limits how far the development.
Thanks. We have a question from Arno in San Francisco, and I can see his question is linked to his work. For the last couple of decades, he's been doing some incredible work in progressive finance, runs this organization that I told you about, Edible Credibles. His question is, the promise of smart contracts is not just about decentralizing finance. Could it just make finance and payments go away as we know it? Are we looking at distributed public accounting and trust infrastructure that govern fair value exchanges? So an example he uses is, if the babysitter eats at the deli, if the plumber fixes the deli sink, do we really need payments and financial exchanges? And this is coming from a person who's actually experimented and run systems like these, and some of these systems are actually running as we speak in the Bay Area. So I'm really interested to hear this response. You guys?
So it's really a crucial point to make. So really appreciate bringing it up, because we are really thinking in those terms of kind of a radical reconceptualization of economy, of finance, precisely along the terms that you're gesturing towards. So one of our kind of infrastructural concepts is thinking about the logic of the offer. So the offer, we're really influenced by kind of an anthropological study of gift economies and how the gift form functions in a similar fashion to derivatives, in the sense that if you give a gift in a gift economy and the counter gift comes immediately, then nothing happens. It falls apart. It's just a flat transaction. What is interesting about the gift economy and offers in general is the opening of a temporal horizon. And it's within that temporal horizon, just like how derivatives operate, where value is generated by transducing uncertainty or risk into value. And so thinking kind of from those conceptual terms, we begin to see ways to start structuring precisely the kinds of maybe offer networks that Arno is prefiguring with that question. And more concretely are working with SingularityNet, which is a partner of ours. That's a artificial general intelligence project that's open source and will be building on Gravity. And this is another concrete use case to your point of that something that couldn't be done on the existing technology because it's not fast enough or scalable enough, because Gravity allows for distributed network topology of virtual machines. So you can place a AI node on a smartphone, and it's lightweight and allows for kind of interactions amongst those virtual machines. And I bring up the AI because with them, we're already in a somewhat utopian or medium to long-term vision, thinking in terms of creating a network of AI offer matching algorithms precisely to almost supercharge the idea of barter, or the idea of being able to exchange heterogeneous values as such and not collapse them back onto the univocal expression of value that we know now, which is the money form. And that homogenizing effect it has kind of really suppresses kind of the rich multiplicity of values that animate our lives. And we really feel that kind of for the first time with these cryptographic technologies, we have an opening. And it's a small temporal opening because lots of other entities are circling to kind of reproduce the existing mono-economy or the existing forms. But that's why we're really pleased to be here with you all, and in general in India, is really seeking collaborative partnerships to be able to rethink these grand questions together. Because we have some ideas, we really need collective intelligence brought to bear to really think how we can have heterogeneous values be transmitted as such, how we can have an offer matching network that's robust enough to not again collapse back onto money that create those kinds of ecologies or communities that can be interoperable.
Just to step in on that point, we've been going in India through artist collectives, through design schools, precisely for that reason. How to make the step from a mono economy to a pluriverse of economies. How to make of economy a design question. That's really what we're all about. So we're not pretending to have all the answers what the new economic forms would be, but we do know that if we go and ask people how do they want to organize themselves, how do designers envisage new modes of collaborations, and what kind of new communities can be emerging, that's the kind of work that we envisage doing for the next few years, like continually enriching the library of templates for new forms of economies. Because the problem right now is that even though people, like we've met a lot of people in the last few months, and like so many people are dedicated to change the economy as we know it, but the very way the financial system is structured and the money form itself is embedded makes it really hard. So for us, the invention of Bitcoin has broken the taboo on money. It allows us to re-engineer money. And from that end, it's like you start conceiving of money as an infrastructure that is used by people to communicate value. And that's the very layer that we can start re-engineering. And that's why we really focus, we're very socially oriented in that sense, because people do have ideas about how to change the world, but it's the infrastructural level that becomes a little bit hard to address sometimes, and it seems a little bit overwhelming.
Thanks, Eric. I think that's encapsulated what you guys are trying to do very well, because and this is what we talk about very often, we're trying to create change, create value, whatever you might call it, but you're still operating under an existing infrastructure system that might be governed by people you don't agree with at all, or it's a system that's not willing to change. And so it's kind of like you're operating within this house that doesn't make sense anymore. And what you're saying is we need to redesign the infrastructure that allows for this new value creation.
Our formula is we're trying to rethink value at the end of the economy as well.
Got it. Few more questions coming in. This is from so Tony, let's go to Tony first. Maybe we can, if you guys can't hear his question, let me know, and I'll say it out loud for the rest of the group.
Probably a really simple question that kind of helped me get my mind around it is to go parallel to where we were with our businesses. So we had a factory owner who then brought in people, and those people didn't get compensated for what they did because there was no way to negotiate value with their labor. So we found on Facebook, they take my value, but I have no way to manage it. So are you actually looking at trying to develop a collective bargaining for IP, for the internet, for people who are on businesses? And then if that's true, the unions monetize it with a subscription service, and I pay to be part of the union to get benefits of collective bargaining. How will you monetize the same thing?
Is question clear? Yeah. So can you also repeat the question before you take the answer? It wasn't clear to everyone on the call.
Okay. So as I understood the question, it was to say, are we contemplating the capacity to create new forms of collective bargaining, of ways to collectivize power in a manner similar to how workers would unionize in industrial capitalism in factories to then bargain with the capitalist owners in order to achieve different kind of living standards or leverage their power. And I think it's spot on and precisely what we're contemplating. The difference being that we think we have even more leverage now, paradoxically, even though in the global economy, certainly the workers everywhere are on the defensive and kind of have exhausted the political potential of unions in many respects, or at least it's been circumscribed. subscribe. And so this is a sort of sidestepping that problematic in order to allow for the collectivization and coordination of people in much more finely grained ways through these smart contracts. So instead of it maybe being limited to this monolithic expression of paying a subscription in order to join a union and create a collective, we can basically make it a design question of what is the purpose we want to achieve together in this particular context, and then we can encode that into a smart contract so that the conditions that we would like to have governing our collective endeavor, that can be accordion-like in the scale of it, allow for incredible versatility, I guess, of the way we can have value flow, as well as the way we can program the governance of said collective entity. We like to think in terms of event-based organizations. So instead of having the organization precede the interactions and therefore constrain them, we're thinking in terms of having the interactions themselves create the emergent organization. And that could be 10 million people coming together for 10 minutes to accomplish a particular purpose and then dissipating again. Or it can be more kind of durable relations in time.
There are two fundamental types. It's needy employee wanting a contract, which you can bring 10,000 of us together to negotiate. But then there's the monetization for you. How do you then have a contract? How do I have a contract with you to get this collective bargaining? And that is my union. Is that the same idea, or do I pay? Do I buy a share, or do I pay? How do the people who get the benefit from this collective bargaining pay you for the service you provide?
Just repeat that for the group.
So the question was how more precisely do people share in the benefit or the upside of the collective bargaining that's happening? So it's not just on a subscription basis, but what other plastic forms could that take? And for me, I think a lot of that comes through the token and the potential of being able to not just have a flat kind of monetary transactional logic, but be able to program kind of the rich density of relations that one wants into the token. So I realize that remains a little abstract, but it's a way of saying that we're seeing a kind of bleeding of the categories between employee, employer, investor, consumer, producer, in a way that we want to shift from the existing zero-sum game of competition and scarcity to a collaborative game of mutual stakeholding and abundance. And the token is the vehicle for that mutual stakeholding, so that if you're participating in an enterprise as a traditional employee, through being paid in tokens or organizing through being mediating these relationships with tokens, it allows for a stakeholding in the upside of whatever the value that's produced by that venture. And so the value can really flow out in a decentralized way.
You're still talking about expanding my labor contract to be holidays as well as salaries and maybe some shares, and then expanding my contract. That's one piece. The other bit I'm interested in is, if I was to invest in ESA, how does ESA function?
And so
I know you're offering this great service and people will pay a token, and I can design the token like my employment contract, you know, some shares, some holidays, a car, what it is I get. But then how do I pay the HR department that gave me this ability to negotiate? How do I pay you guys? I mean, how do I invest in the ESA piece? How does ESA monetize all the stuff you're doing?
So again, the question was how can the economic space agency benefit or monetize from these new types of organization that we're actually providing for people. So the simple answer is in order to benefit from these flexible smart contracts, these new types of organization that will be formed through these new types of token and smart contracts will pay a small fee in gravity tokens to run the contract. So basically, if very similar to Ethereum and gas, right? In order to run an Ethereum smart contract, one has to
So I pay the headhunter to get in the contract, and the headhunter grows as a company
because they get a lot of fees for headhunting, basically. You do this collective bargaining. All the people who get contracts pay you a gravity token for the service of putting everybody together and finding me the job, and then you grow your business by the sum of the gravity token.
And so gravity tokens are also used as an economic engine
Sure.
to empower the open community that will be
Right. Headhunters within your company to go out and make contracts for people. It's different lines.
Maybe to add on that, you have the gravity layer with the functional fabric, and you have space, which is the ecosystem in which all these forms of organization are going to form themselves. We call them economic spaces. It's going to be free of entry. You know, if your economic space is doing great and you have like thousands of people in, then ECSA offers you a mutual stakeholding in terms of space tokens being exchanged with the token that powers your own organization. And that's the business model, basically, in a nutshell.
In interest of time, we've got a bunch of questions coming in. So let's start with Darshan first, because I think it's kind of related to what Tony said, and then we'll head to Francis's question. And so Darshan from the UK first says, thanks guys, it's worthwhile waking up on an early Saturday morning, a rainy morning in London. Do you have any thoughts on how something so fluid, fast and fair can work within an old school governance system? This is great because Darshan and I have had a bunch of debates around this, especially related to sacred capital, because at times he said, how are we really reforming the existing economic system? Are you saying we just discard it, walk out of it and create something new? Or do you think the existing system can also benefit from what you guys are trying to create? And Darshan, let me know if that captured what you're trying to ask.
Can you add to that?
Yep, and just as an add-on to that,
sooner or later, states are going to fight back. That's the history of alternative currencies. They've been outlawed whenever they took off. Now, this is hard to do because those are in a pre-digital age in the early 20th century. And so I understand that the digital age creates new opportunities and new forms of empowerment, but states are not going to sit by. And in fact, the biggest interest today in data monopolization, big data monopolization and manipulation for control over large populations is by governments. So are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so for those who couldn't hear that, Rajni's question was, states are not going to stand by quietly, and obviously they're going to retaliate, because what you're talking about is pretty revolutionary. And so what do you guys think about that? And I'd request you guys to just look into the camera, because that's when the mic picks it up the best. Yeah, we won't think it's rude. Yeah.
So maybe I'll jump in with that excellent question. Maybe Eric can follow up a little. I think if we're doing our job right, states will pay attention. I think that's what we see as the disruptive potential of what we're developing, and that necessarily it will initially be a hybridized approach, kind of with the existing economy, in the sense that I think it's kind of a dangerous illusion to think that we could just immediately or fully subtract ourselves from the existing forms. I think there's a lot of interesting space to play with, of being able to take platforms like an Uber or some of the existing monopolies and begin to democratize them in a gradual fashion, so that, again, we'll play with this hybridity of, there are some aspects of the legacy forms that I think in our view don't really have a space in the new economy, and maybe in a manner similar to the disruption of the brick and mortar buildings or businesses. some exist still, and some have been hybridized by the new digital economy, and some have been completely left behind. And I think certainly the trajectory of these developments are towards that radical of a scale of change, and even more so given the capacity to transmit value data in a disintermediated fashion. And so we're really working at that edge to be able to provide sort of the tangible capacity for material reproduction for people, because that certainly remains necessary, but being able to empower people to really leverage the kinds of values that always already are circulating amongst us, but can't find expression in the existing economy, and being able to give them a greater consistency, both through scalability. So this is a really crucial part. So for instance, alternative currencies is something we're looking a lot at and see a lot of potential in them. And that what the tools we're providing will allow is to leverage those existing socialities that are embodied in those community currencies by giving them the capacity to have translocal interoperability with other similarly situated communities, which suddenly creates a whole new infrastructure of coordination, of being able to not have these be geographically circumscribed in their scope. And so it's really that ability, both
nationally, not just geographically, but within national boundaries.
precisely.
And that's where we envisage a world in which you have plenty of local currencies. At that level, there's the qualitative element that's being injected. But then because there's an interoperability with these different local economies, then you have financial depth. So to answer also partly to one of the former questions, it's not just about transacting. Economy is not just about transacting in exchange. It's about time, relation in time. As Sky was saying before, like the gift economy analogy is a very important one for us, because it's really finance, and it's an art of crafting futurity. It's an art of setting the attractors for your own behavior in time. So it's a way of crafting communities, of crafting channels of interest and desires in time. And that's what we envisage to be doing. Another way to answer your question, maybe a little bit more concretely speaking, on two different ends. Right now, the crypto economy as we know it is very loosely regulated, or not really. The SEC has emitted some kind of like warning about, because we're not only dealing with currency, that's the thing, we're dealing with liquid shares basically. So it's also concerning the securities as we know it. So it's a true sea change that we're operating right now. It's going to change fundamentally the economy. And that's one of the reasons why we insist a lot at ECSA. We're not just a bunch of techies, like we have a very, very rich and heterogeneous crew. And if you go on our website, you will see we have lots of advisors coming from different grounds, lots of academics, financial theorists who have a thorough understanding of the history of finance as we know it. Because history basically allows you to know that things, like contrary to Margaret Thatcher would say, there's no alternative. When you know history, you know that there has been decisions taken at different moments in time to answer precise challenges. And that's the kind of wealth of wisdom that we want to tap in. So we have like the younger, like that are ready to go through the world and map and do some ethnographies of different ways of organizing ourselves. But then we also have, for example, Robert Meister, a great financial theorist, who's like, we call him our Roman senator, because he knows, he's been through a lot of fights and storms, and he's a great inspiration for us. It's kind of our godfather, for that matter.
Thank you. I think that was really beautiful. Let me unmute I'm unmuted. Francis had a question, and I think this has sparked off a bunch of other voices on the chat. He says the internet really took hold when people who had no idea how it works finally found it imperative for their lives. Your space offering seems poised to bring that level of simplicity to the average user, and so bring the blockchain to people's lives. Do you envision the super simple interfaces that would be needed to be successful? And can you share any of that vision? And I kind of agree, like I still don't know how the internet works, but I know how it's useful to me. And the analogy I draw is, I think with the blockchain, it's going to be the same. There'll just be a bunch of people who don't necessarily understand it, but when they see the impact it can make on their lives, it significantly changes their interaction with it. So I don't know if you guys are thinking about this stuff, but where you think some of the other collaborators you're working with could be bringing this into the real world, as people describe it.
Well, yeah, we are actively working on interface design and user experience design, and we are particularly interested in experimenting with or really like making felt this idea of drag and drop type of economies. So we are literally working with a lot of user interface that will enable users to literally drag on the screen the components of the smart contract templates and economic spaces. And
give us some examples, like what if suppose there's a freelance artist sitting somewhere in the corner of the world, what could that look like?
Right. So on that specific point, we are working on visualizing the types of constellations that we'll be able to create in space. Yeah. So one way to look at it, for instance, in the case of a freelancer, that say a videographer that is collaborating or that has been hired, for instance, to collaborate on a design project with an agency. So the videographer would see on his or her interface the type of constellation and relation that, for instance, the designer agency is already involved with, and would be able to, for instance, plug into that type of, or at the very least be visualized and be discovered within that network in order to be able to connect with other potential new partners or new collaborators in other types of projects.
Could I also frame it as we could see the entity going down to the investable entity going down all the way to an individual on the ground? And if that is the case, like capital could actually be flowing freely into this person in Munich, that person in Tokyo, and that's what you see happening in the next few years?
Yeah, that's exactly what we are envisaging, and we really think that ultimately within Space and Gravity we are talking about agents and agencies as these constellations of agents that kind of serve a specific function within the system. So it ultimately all comes down to agents as the ultimate actors within the platform and the ultimate channels through which these flows of capital go.
Sandeep says he's not a an engineer, and therefore he's often has struggled with the kind of concepts you guys have been throwing at us. Is there an intention your end to create simpler language, or is that not your work? That's the question coming in.
I mean, we have a bunch of formulas like Space is a plug and play DAO creator, being a distributed autonomous organization. I mean, there's different ways, maybe to build on what Lara was saying just before. Like capitalism as we've known it is really about production. The very idea of how you produce something into the world. And what's changing nowadays is that the very act of production, we've always thought of it in very modern ways as like almost an heroic movement, like an entrepreneur bringing in something new into the world, and we have like all sorts of mythologies. And I think, like, to be speaking in a very simple language, that this production paradigm is kind of being inflected towards a circulation paradigm. And we keep talking about how capital will flow like smoothly. We now start to have a very concrete idea that capital is a social relation. It's bounded by different dimensions: political, economical, ecological, and all of this then materialized in the money form, goes into somebody's wallet, and then moves on. So for example, you are a musician. You want to issue one of these great musical ideas that you have. Well, that idea is already kind of existing in relation with the community that will listen to that music. So it's almost as if you can materialize that flow by issuing a token. Like right now, you already have musicians that will do pre-sale of albums that don't already exist. What you can do now is like high octane that possibility by making issuance of tokens that will give you access to the album once it's produced, but it's also kind of taking care of the circulation of the album already. So the production and the circulation, that's the kind of stuff that we're going to be seeing more and more in the next few years, I think.
This is like sort of like if I were probably going back 2 steps, but I mean, I'm putting it as 2 dimensions really. So there's a society that we live in Thailand right now. Obviously, that's not going to change. But what you're saying is that the individual who is now on an alternate platform, quite really, will then have a choice to saying that, okay, like I have, like let's take the example of a freelance artist. He'll come and saying that I have a project which I want to give to the world, and in the world that we live in, and then I will. So it's my choice to put it out there or not. And if I put it out there, then I want to get paid in, let's say, let's take money, let's take an alternate current. He has the option now, you're saying, is what eventually will happen is that he will freely have an option to choose to put his work wherever he wants and get paid for in whatever form that he wants. I mean, that's eventually where we are going, or is that eventually where you want to go, right?
The wealth is in the community. You know, like this album might not be translated in rupees or in dollars. It might be translated in a counter offer of someone saying, if you come to India, I will gladly host you. You know, I mean, that's the kind of lunch, the contact, connection. That's what wealth is about. There's a question.
Let's go with Sky, a reflection. You had something
Well,
to add?
just to build upon that a little bit, it's really a shift away from thinking of bilateral transactions or relationships into ecosystemic thinking. So that what an artist is doing is creating an ecosystem around them, of which the consumers of the music become active kind of constituents of that ecosystem, so that it isn't a unidirectional relationship of an artist issuing this creative product into the world and it being consumed by an audience that's kind of passively receiving it. But all of a sudden there's the capacity for the audience to actively engage in more complex relationships with that artist. So those can be pre-sale relationships, so that the artist is guaranteed a certain distribution of the album, but it can also be some sort of quasi-governance kinds of relations, so that the audience itself can co-produce what the artist is thinking of creating or inflect the direction of it, so that it really is based on creating a community around production, because production is always co-poietic, is always co-production and mutually inscribed within a community. And so it allows for really kind of almost unimaginable forms of collaboration, because even more traditional financial instruments can be written into these tokens or relations, so that if this album sells 50,000 units or whatever kind of traditional markers, then maybe all the initial people who entered in at an earlier stage and bore that risk can share some in the upside of that because they were there at that earlier stage, or whatever kinds of kind of exotic options one wants to encode in. And that's really where we come in talking about open sourcing finance, is allowing these capacities for orienting or commanding futurity to be given to everyone and be used in their hands.
Thank you. I think that answered, I hope that answered Sandeep's question. We have just about 10 minutes to go here. I'm just going to be very strict with the time, because I know there's a lot of people listening in really late at night. So we'll go with Rajni first, and then Akshay has a question as well. If there's anyone else on the group who has a question, please pop it into the chat. So we just take 2 questions. So let's try and keep the responses short and the counter questions short as well.
So eventually talking is of course a very big phenomenon and it's very seductive. But it's not what's putting food on the table and clothes on people's back and shelter over their head. And how are you seeing the real nuts and bolts? That's what the economy originally existed for, right? So we have the necessities of life and of comfort and of then creating leisure. So what is the connection? I can imagine various ways. Because on the ground, the same open source struggles are there in agriculture, in medicine, and water management, but they are very beaten down.
I can start answering rapidly. It's always kind of strange when you
you want to look this way?
Blockchain.
Sorry. Look this way. Yeah.
Because it's all of a sudden all the problems of the world are falling on us. We're just trying to change things. But yeah. So maybe 2-3 thoughts, and it's the kind of stuff we're discussing a lot. So one of the things we were discussing before is the question of Wikipedia, for example, but more in general, the comments. Like how to defend the comments that are being predated upon nowadays. And we know that it's kind of a crazy system we're in because the people that are predating upon the comments don't have interest in predating upon it. It's kind of a systemic machine that keeps on feeding on itself. So how to reverse engineer that dynamic so that the comments can be self-guarding themselves. So we're working, one case that we work on is a Terra Zero. It's a self-governing forest. So it's the idea that the forest itself could be allowed to speak through AI, expressing its needs, expressing its capacities for self-exploitation so that it participates to the economy of humans, but also participates to its own purpose, which is, I guess, continue to live. And we can start imagining these forms of empowerment of the different entities on which our life depends, but start personalizing them, like we talk in terms of agents, so that they become part of the game. Because the modern economy as we know it takes the world as a passive theater. And then there's only active humans doing the activity of production. And that's what Sky was referring to before. Copoiesis is copoiesis between humans, but it's also with non-humans agents. It's a large answer, but it's what we need to be thinking of at all layers. The production, the economical production is always with non-human material at the end of the day. So how to make sure that we transmit to the human agents a sense of the value of the things that they're being used. And we've been trying for a long time. I think that now is the time is ripe to operationalize the common, bring in paradoxically an economic logic where you would think maybe like sacred capital, the very name of it kind of tells you you need to protect stuff from being destroyed. And paradoxically, the kind of weird bet that we're into it is to introduce a new economic logic that would actually change the way we conceive of value.
Thank you. That was, I'm glad we're recording this. I'll send the link out after we're done. One last question, and then there's a bunch of reflections that I'll share to end the call. So Akshay, this is you.
Yeah, so this is a little tech or geek question, or I would say a suggestion. So along with the Gravity white paper, I read a JavaScript proposal in the link. So is there any inclination towards including JavaScript interfaces to this VM that you are developing? Because the way you are trying to make it like a plug and play interface for the users, JavaScript, as we all know, is the language for the web, and that could actually make it to that level using that kind of changes that you are trying to.
Yeah, that's precisely what we're doing. The main language that we're using to develop Gravity is JavaScript or ECMAScript, and also Gravity itself will be ultimately agnostic to the kind of application to the languages in which the kind of application will be built on top of it. So within the Gravity platform, JavaScript is the main language, and then there will be the possibility to accommodate all like other kinds of languages, and that's again to really enable the vast the most of development and participation from all sorts of open source communities that write in any kind of programming languages.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. One last question, which I think has been on everyone's mind. How can we assist your efforts? Because I think you have a room full, as well as a conference call full of people who are pretty excited by what you guys are doing. You might want to share a few details on your upcoming coin offering. You might want to share how you guys think, because I know it's not hierarchical. You guys think more collaborative, more network. And so this might be a good opportunity to open up, those options that we can engage through.
Yeah, so I can field that. Maybe give a three and a half fold answer. The first is that we're actively in seeking pre-sale funds before our ICO. So we really feel like we have a very powerful play and a really strong infrastructural technology that's going to make a big impact. And so we are really looking for close collaborators to become stakeholders in this ecosystem that we're constructing, because as you were gesturing to, Siddhartha, the way we operate is, again, really internalizing this new ethos of the economy. So it isn't anymore about competition or jealously guarding proprietary information. It's very much about open collaboration and mutual stakeholding. And so our team both operates very horizontally, but is also very porous in the sense that all of the core team members and the network kind of orbiting around the team really sets the intensity and mode of their engagement in a very fluid fashion. So we have lots of different forms of contribution coming in, both in more traditional capital resource terms, but also lots of heterogeneous forms of ideas and contributions. And so that is the way we really want to both operate internally within our team, so that we're prefiguring the ethos and the logic that we're trying to instill in the Gravity space ecosystem, so that it really allows the flourishing of the kind of economy that we're trying to create. And so that then moves to the second piece, which is the ICO itself. That once we have all of these components in place, where we don't want to rush things, we'll be having our ICO sometime this fall. And so that would be an excellent time to contribute, and that's a way to again gain stakes through the Gravity token in the construction of this ecosystem. And then the third way, which is a big part of why we're here today, is we don't think just the technology is enough. We don't want to bring Gravity into the world and step back and hope that it gets used for the kinds of purposes that we all seem to be aligned around. But it really is an active offer or solicitation for collaboration in thinking these new economic, social, financial forms. So we have an Econaut space program, which is a laboratory for research and development for economic space design. And so we kind of are calling for all the designers, engineers, architects, what these new economic spaces can be, because we precisely need the kind of thinking, the kind of collective intelligence that's in this room, that's on this phone call joining us, to co-design these kinds of spaces. So just before this meeting, for instance, we were talking with Siddhartha about how Sacred Capital, for instance, is already contemplating operating as a distributed autonomous organization, and that we're at a stage in our development where we, similarly with the Singularity Net, are in a kind of relation of reciprocal presupposition in the way we're developing things. So we really all benefit from entering into these conversations as a mode of kind of co-design or co-thinking of what we can accomplish together, so that your ideas for your spaces, what your passions are, can inform our design thinking, and the same way reflect back onto expanding said passions, said kind of desires of what we all want to bring into the world together.
Yeah. On the last bit, this is something we discussed just before the call. Some of our analysts are sitting here, like our analyst network could potentially be sitting in the fabric that these guys design, and so the economic systems that channels flow into each analyst around the world could be designed by you guys, could run on your fabric. The matching algorithms, the rating algorithms that we use with Singularity will come to your fabric, and that's I think that's the concept of Econaut creating an experimental collaboration is definitely exciting. I know that Francis and a bunch of other people on the call have been talking about Everyone, which is a collaborative network for independent freelancers, individuals. That could be something that could possibly manifest. The options are endless. That's why I'm going to share everyone's details over email, because I think there's a lot that we could take from here. And so to close, I hope I've covered everyone's questions. If I've missed anything out, it's probably just because we've had a really crowded chat window. And to close, I'd like to just share a little bit of what Arno said on the chat window. And he said this is exactly why we need to have calls like these, not just to fertilize each other's thinking, but also to increase the group of interpreters who can translate the thinking into real life challenges. And I think we have an extremely diverse set of people here, and I think it's sitting here, I feel like there's something exciting that just happens through collaborations that we spark off. So thank you guys. This has been a fantastic Saturday morning. For us, Friday night for some people, Saturday evening for some others. But we must be a little crazy to be spending our weekends in conversations like these. But I think great things happen through crazy conversations. So thank you once again. And I'm just going to invite everyone to unmute themselves and say a big goodbye to everyone here. And as a reminder, I'm recording this call, so I'm going to share this, share the link to this video so we can go back and probably have someone translate what you said. Thank you. Thanks, guys. And hope to stay connected. Thank you.